There are moments in a man's life that don't announce themselves. They don't arrive with warning or logic. They just appear at the end of a dirt road, breathing slow, bleeding quiet, and waiting to see what kind of person you are. It was a Tuesday in late October when Dale Hutchins first saw the Bobcat. Not running, not snarling, just lying on his side near the tree line at the edge of the property, one back leg caught in a rusted steel trap that hadn't been touched in years. Dale had forgotten it was even out there. He stood 30 feet away, coffee still warm in his hand, and the two of them just looked at each other. The animal was young, maybe 18 months old. His coat was dull, his breathing shallow. The trap had been on him long enough that the leg had swollen around the teeth of it. Dale had seen injured animals before. He'd grown up in rural Tennessee, where you learned early that nature doesn't negotiate. You let things go when they needed letting go. That was the practical way, the honest way. He went inside and called the county wildlife office. They told him what he already half expected to hear. A bobcat that age, with that kind of injury, caught that close to residential property. The standard outcome was euthanasia. Too dangerous to rehabilitate, too wild to release near homes. They'd send someone out in the morning. Dale hung up the phone and stood at the kitchen window for a long time. He went back outside as the sun started dropping behind the tree line. The bobcat hadn't moved. His eyes tracked Dale carefully, not with aggression but with something that looked almost like resignation, like he understood what was coming and had already made peace with it. That look did something to Dale that he wouldn't fully be able to explain for years afterward. He didn't make a decision so much as he just started moving. He got his work gloves, an old horse blanket, a pair of bolt cutters from the barn. He talked low the entire time, not to calm the cat, he'd say later, but to calm himself. His hands were shaking. It took 11 minutes to free the leg. The bobcat didn't fight him once. That night, Dale Hutchins drove 45 minutes to an emergency vet with a wild animal wrapped in a horse blanket on his passenger seat, wondering what on earth he had just started. The vet's name was Dr. Miriam Okafor, and she had seen a lot of things walk through her emergency clinic door in 17 years of practice. A bobcat wrapped in a horse blanket, brought in by a quiet man in muddy boots who couldn't quite explain why he'd done what he'd done. That was a first. She told Dale the leg wasn't broken, badly damaged, soft tissue trauma, early signs of infection, but the bone had held. With proper care, the cat had a real chance. She also told him gently but clearly that rehabilitating a wild bobcat was not a casual undertaking. There were permits, there were liability questions, there were very specific reasons most people didn't do this. Dale nodded at all of it. He asked her what the cat needed. The first 3 weeks were the hardest. Dale converted his back utility room into a recovery space. Concrete floor, no sharp edges, a dog crate large enough for the animal to move without stressing the leg. He named him Ruckus, mostly because the name felt honest. The cat made clear from the beginning that he did not want to be touched, did not want to be watched, and did not want to be anywhere near a human being. He would press himself into the far corner of the crate whenever Dale came in, eyes flat and unreadable. Dale kept his distance. He learned quickly that trust with a wild animal isn't built through kindness, it's built through consistency. He came at the same times every day. He moved slowly. He never reached. He sat on the floor sometimes and just read, letting the sound of his voice become something familiar rather than threatening. There were setbacks. One evening Dale came in to find Ruckus had reopened the wound, likely from pacing. Another night, the cat knocked over his water bowl and refused to eat for 2 days straight. Dale's neighbor, Frank, told him he was going to get himself killed. His daughter called from Nashville and asked if he'd lost his mind. He told her probably a little, but something was shifting slowly, almost invisibly. Around the 4th week, Ruckus stopped pressing into the corner when Dale entered the room. He would still watch him, still track every movement, but the hard edge in his eyes had softened into something closer to cautious curiosity. Then one morning Dale set down the food bowl and sat back against the wall, and Ruckus walked to the bowl without waiting for him to leave. It was a small thing. It was everything. 6 weeks after Dale brought Ruckus home, the wildlife permit came through. It authorized temporary rehabilitation custody, nothing more. The language was clear. The goal was release. Once the animal was healthy enough to survive on his own, he was to be returned to the wild. Dale had signed the paperwork without hesitation. He thought about that signature a lot in the weeks that followed. Ruckus healed faster than anyone expected. His leg regained full function by week 7. He was eating well, moving fluidly, and had begun to explore the utility room with the quiet confidence of an animal remembering what his body was built for. Dr. Okafor came out for a follow-up and declared him, in her words, remarkably resilient. She also reminded Dale, kindly but without room for misinterpretation, that releasing him soon was the right thing to do. Dale knew that. He believed it. He told himself he was ready. The night before the planned release, he sat on the floor of the utility room for a long time. Ruckus was stretched out near the far wall, not pressed against it like before, just resting near it, comfortable in the way animals get comfortable when they finally stop expecting the worst. At some point during those quiet weeks, without either of them making a conscious choice about it, the room had stopped being a recovery space and started being something else, something harder to name. Ruckus lifted his head and looked at Dale across the room, held it there. Dale looked back. He reached out his hand slowly, palm up, the way he'd learned not to do in the beginning, the way every instinct about wild animals said you shouldn't. Ruckus watched him for a long moment. Then he stood, crossed the room in 4 unhurried steps, and pressed the side of his broad, scarred head against Dale's open hand. Dale didn't move. He barely breathed. It lasted maybe 10 seconds. Then Ruckus stepped back, turned and settled himself down again like nothing had happened, like it was the most ordinary thing in the world. Dale sat there in the quiet for a long time after that. There was no dramatic decision made in that moment, no clear resolution, just a man in a utility room in rural Tennessee, trying to figure out what you owe a wild thing that's chosen, against every instinct it was born with, to trust you. In the morning he made 2 phone calls. The first was to Dr. Okafor. The second was to a wildlife attorney. The wildlife attorney's name was Sandra Bro, and she had spent 20 years navigating the complicated space between human attachment and wildlife law. She had heard every version of this story before. She told Dale the truth plainly. Obtaining permanent sanctuary status for a wild-born bobcat was not impossible, but it was not simple either. There would be inspections, enclosure requirements, ongoing documentation. It would cost him time and money and patience, and there was no guarantee it would be approved. Dale told her to start the paperwork. It took 4 months. The enclosure he built occupied a 1/4 acre behind the house, proper fencing, elevated platforms, sheltered areas, a connected access door that opened into the utility room Ruckus had come to think of as his own. Dale built most of it himself, with Frank helping on weekends despite his earlier reservations. Frank didn't say much about the change of heart. He just showed up with tools. The sanctuary license was approved on a Thursday in early spring. Life settled into a rhythm after that, quiet and unhurried, the way good things tend to go when nobody is performing them for anyone else. Ruckus never became a pet in any conventional sense. He remained what he was, a wild animal with a wild animal's instincts and boundaries and moments of sudden unpredictable independence. He patrolled the enclosure on his own schedule. He disappeared into the sheltered corners for days at a time. He accepted affection selectively and entirely on his own terms. But he also on certain evenings pushed through the access door and walked into the house. He learned the layout of the living room the way cats do, methodically, deliberately, as if cataloging it for future reference. He claimed the far end of the couch as his, a position he defended not with aggression, but with the simple, immovable weight of an animal who has decided something belongs to him. Dale stopped questioning it. There is a particular kind of life that doesn't get planned. It gets chosen, quietly in the small moments that don't feel significant until much later. A man at a kitchen window, a wild animal on a utility room floor, a hand extended without expectation. These things accumulate into something larger than any single decision. Dale Hutchins will tell you he didn't save Ruckus. He's said it enough times now that it sounds less like modesty and more like something he's actually worked out to be true. The bobcat was lying in the trap. Dale just happened to have bolt cutters. What happened after the trust, the mornings, the couch, that was Ruckus choosing. And some choices, it turns out, go both ways.